Doug, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
So I'm really excited about our conversation today because there are, probably millions of people all over the world who may be doing remote work for the first time. And you have a ton of experience in technology and all of the things that wrap around the realities of what people are encountering remote work-wise. I'd love to kind of start off by maybe just you giving us a little intro on what you actually do for people and maybe even how that's changed or been affected in the last couple of weeks as we are dealing with this coronavirus.
Sure. So we manage the technology for small to medium-sized organizations that typically have 50 to 100 employees. Across our client base, we support nearly 2,000 employees across all our customers. So this has been an interesting time, with basically networks being turned inside out, where people are now from predominantly being inside the office to being outside. So it's definitely last few weeks have been challenging, but we're excited because we're really helping our clients out, be able to continue to be productive and generate revenue through this, unique time we're in.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because a lot of people are having to make this transition. In some companies, maybe they've been doing remote work for a long time, but my guess is a lot of them have not. And some of them, their infrastructure may not be in a place where they're even able to. What percentage or, what's the feel that you have as far as not even really your clients specifically, because they're probably even more prepared, but people that are outside of that, what's your gauge on how prepared people actually are to manage remote work successfully?
Yeah, so telecommuting has been a thing for many years now. It's been adopted, minimally in a lot of cases or completely in others. So depending on kind of where they were on that curve and then being able to or needing to work remotely after hours and things, they may have had some technologies in place to support that. But what we're typically seeing is not to the extent that we're seeing now, again, where most people are shifting to the house. So I've met with probably 500 CEOs here in North Florida and gotten a good glimpse of what their technologies look like before they worked with us. Not all of them, obviously, but it's interesting because you get exposed to things that are in various states of disarray and older firewalls and things that have been left there for many years. So unfortunately, I think across the board outside our client base, there's a lot of people that just weren't ready for this. So they're scrambling right now, and with our customers, we take a standardized approach to the infrastructure, like the Southwest Airlines model, one airplane. So that's paid huge dividends for our customers. But that's why I wanted to get on this podcast with you to try to help with the folks that are scrambling right now, trying to figure out which way is up.
I'd love to hear you explain that a little bit more, because I would have guessed there's probably some people listening that may not even realize what you mean. I know exactly what you're talking about as it relates to Southwest Airlines, but maybe kind of explain that idea of a standardized approach of what Southwest does in general, and then kind of how that relates to what you guys do in order to help people manage things well.
Sure. I mean, they took the approach of one model airplane. That meant one set of parts, one set of operating procedures, one way to train their staff. So we took that to heart years ago, and there's a lot of core things that exist in a business's IT environment around firewalls and wireless and switches and things of that sort, and even servers to some extent. So we basically had a core stack that our team is fully trained in. It's enterprise grade gear, and it's really in this case paid some huge dividends because they had the VPN capability, they had the security, and a lot of things to leverage. So. For us, our team is certified on it, trained on it, allows us to fix things faster, allows us to deploy things faster. So that's been huge in the last couple of weeks working with our customers. But unfortunately, that's not typically the norm outside of our organization.
So it's interesting because I think that is kind of a little bit of a business lesson as well for people, because this podcast, while I want to focus on the ideas of remote work and technology now in the midst of a crisis, I also think this is a good time for business owners to kind of take stock of what have I been doing that maybe wasn't working as well as it should, especially now that it really is going to get tested in this environment, and having to make transitions to go, hey, maybe I need a more standardized approach. Maybe I need a better, more consistent plan. I know it's made me retake stock of everything, because in crisis, all the things that were kind of negative to some extent, I think, get amplified, but the things that were good can get amplified as well.
That's right. Yeah, hindsight's 20/20. I mean, people are in the thick of it right now. So just how do we get them out of it, as quick as we can and get them back to business? That's what we're going to help with.
When thinking about a company that needs to transition to remote work, which most companies now are being forced to do that in some way, what is one of the first thing or the first few things that you think companies need to be considering or paying attention to as their team is needing to make that remote transition?
So for what we do, I mean, the default answer you'd expect to be security first. You got to protect your environment. But, ultimately you got to, we're realists as well. I'm a business owner. I get, functionality is number one right now. So I think that, getting people productive and efficient and able to do their jobs in some shape or form from the outside, but then I would say quickly circling back afterwards, and we're doing this with our customers, and making sure that, the gaps that I'm sure we'll touch on around security and cybersecurity concerns get addressed quickly and the exposure isn't there for an extended period of time.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to dig into that cybersecurity stuff because I think it's any kind of security stuff. If we're in the midst of panic, we might overlook some of the things that might be important and leave open access to things that we don't want others or the public or even people that maybe have negative ideas trying to cause trouble getting access to. So we definitely are going to come back to that. Thinking about remote work in general, I kind of put down a few notes of areas where I felt like companies had to pay attention to. And I'm curious, what you think about these. And if you think there's things that are missing, there's kind of the psychology of remote work, people having to be alone. There's the technology of what people actually need. And then there's the physical space of physically doing work. A lot of people are working from their bedrooms or their houses or from their back porches or wherever they can get access to. And then obviously your side focuses a lot on that technology, but how do you see, the technology and all those other pieces affecting how somebody's able to do their job well in the midst of crisis?
Sure. Just one thing I just want to touch on, just the previous topic we just talked about, just like, functionality first, then security. I'm kind of viewing this as like Maslow's, hierarchy of needs. We got to get them generating revenue and productive, then security. But, communications is in my mind that next layer. Voice, making sure that the teams can communicate amongst themselves and with clients. I just want to make sure I mention that because I think that's there's levels here of functionality that exists, and as we navigate through this, I think it's going to be important that we continue to layer on things to make everyone as productive as possible. But sorry, I just want to make sure I touched on that.
That's good. Actually, I would like actually to circle on that double down on that just a little bit more. When we talk about like what those functional technologies are there any particular tools that you recommend to people? Now, I guess this probably is going to vary depending on whether somebody's a two-person shop or whether they have 50 team members or 500 team members. It probably varies a little bit. But are there particular tools that you recommend that you say, hey, here's some tool sets, a stack of software that might be helpful for people? Anything specific that you guys like?
Yeah, so it's interesting because there's, again, immediate needs of like, I need to have video conferencing capability with my clients or prospects. And, and then something like we're using right now, Zoom, it does one thing great. So it's easy to roll out. It's pretty intuitive on how it's used. So something like that is quick. If they already had, the lion's share of our customers are on the Microsoft Office 365 platform. So depending on their level of adoption with Microsoft Teams, that's typically our go-to because it has a lot of that capability and then some. So it checks a lot of other boxes around their team collaborating and communicating better, sharing files remotely, things of that sort. So we've helped a lot of our customers through the years adopt it. We use it, every single day. So we're good. We share with them what we do and how we leverage it. And then show them what's possible in that regard. But I would say Zoom as far as like the quick and dirty on the video, if that's the core functionality you need. But again, it's this is a good point to make of like, have IT departments vet whatever you're considering, because it's easy to do a quick Google search and find something, but you could potentially be creating security risk and people may just sign up for something and try to start using it. So have IT vet it, evaluate it. There may be something already that you're paying for or can get for free that you can use and even avoid additional costs. So just some words of warning there.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to spin up something that maybe is not the best use. Microsoft Teams is something I've actually been hearing come up a whole lot lately. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because the everywhere transition to remote work, but even a month or two ago, I felt like I was hearing that a lot more. I think Microsoft's done a really good job over the last few years. I think I felt like they certainly weren't dying off, but they were struggling for a while from a software standpoint. And I think they've really totally revitalized that. So some people may not even be familiar with what Teams is. I think people think Microsoft, they think Office, they think Excel, they think maybe PowerPoint. Maybe they don't realize what some of these online tools are. So could you talk a little bit more about what Teams provides for a company and how that might help them, especially in a remote work environment?
Sure. So Teams, you actually, if you have an Office 365 subscription, you already get Teams, so there's no extra cost to use it. Microsoft is actually now doing if you're not a 365 user or company a subscriber, you can actually get Office 365 licenses for free for 6 months because of this COVID-19
Wow.
outbreak. So yeah, I mean, there's one piece of it is obviously the licensing, but it has to get set up, and there's that's what I was saying. Depending on your level of adoption, because there's right ways to roll this thing out. So Teams, at a most basic level, can just be used for chat amongst your employees, right? So just one platform for them to go in. It has integrated meeting capability, so you can schedule meetings through it. It's integrated with your Outlook calendar and your email to that extent. But it also has video capability as well. So it doesn't just have to be voice. It could also be video. That's all part of it. A big part that we use is it has file sharing capability as well. And they give a tremendous amount of storage, even I think per person, 1 terabyte, I think is the number off the top of my head. So just a tremendous amount. So you can, in one place, you can create secure groups. And what I mean by that is, like, you can have a finance team that adds specific people that are in your finance group, finance department. Only they can see those chat conversations. Only they can see those files that are uploaded there. There's a lot more that you could do with Teams. We've done workflow automation. It's pretty incredible what you can do and how you can continue to leverage it. We use it for our project management. There's just a ton there. But at a base level, team chat, team meetings, you could do meetings with external clients. They don't have to be in your Teams platform. You could even invite vendors in externally. That's something that has to be turned on. It's not on by default, but to actually have them collaborate with your team as well. And then file sharing and collaboration in real time. So you mentioned Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You can actually, if you upload files there, you can actually have 10 people in the same Word document at the same time collaborating within Teams. So there's a tremendous amount. And there's tons of online free resources for training videos. So again, there's a light way to roll this out with, like, just get chat and meetings going. When you start getting into like file structure and things, like, you want someone to help you really structure that right, because if you just try to address an immediate need right now, you could be having to go back and reverse the whole thing and set it back up again once you get through this.
Yeah, I think getting that software stuff set up right the first time can make a big difference. And correct me if I'm wrong, but here's kind of how I'm seeing this in my head as you talk about this. I feel like some of the individual tools out there right now, like Slack for messaging, Zoom for video chat, there's probably a lot of others, but those are the two biggest brands that come to my mind right now. Are these individual tools who do like one thing well, but then the issue is you have to connect all these things if you want to get them to talk to one another, and that can be kind of even a bigger pain because they're not really in the same ecosystem. And so it reminds me a little bit of, like, on the marketing side, we use HubSpot, and you do as well, which is a great tool, and we like it because it integrates a lot of different tool sets together, where we might have needed 6 pieces of software before from separate vendors and then tried to, like, integrate them behind the scenes, which is never perfect. It sounds like what Teams does is it basically takes a lot of those things and it blends them all together. So you have one tool set, one login, one place to go. And if there's one thing people hate more than just about anything, it's passwords for websites these days.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's like I said, we live in it every day, and it's everything to us as well. So yeah, it definitely brings a lot of those. And the fact that it's within your 365 subscription, you don't have to pay any extra for it, even makes it better.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge for people that don't have it. If Microsoft's offering that free trial or a free couple of months, 6 months even, is amazing. So people should check that out. It's not a tool that I've even played with, and I'm kind of a tool junkie, so it's kind of weird that I haven't tried it, but now I want to go check it out. So thanks for sharing that. Let's
No problem.
transition a little bit and talk about where we were going, which is issues as it relates to remote work. And like I said, it could be psychology, it could be the physical space, or it could be the technology. What issues are you seeing people run into as they try and make this transition? Where are people getting struggling? Where are they getting stuck?
So you mentioned psychology earlier, and it's funny, with my wife and my son are home. He's goes to Ponte Vedra High School, and now virtual schooling. So distractions are plentiful. The dogs are locked up right now, so you don't have to hear the barking that may happen. So just trying to stay focused, and but also still pay attention to them and give them the love and caring that they need. So it's definitely a balance in managing that. I would say, keeping your mental health in mind, and stopping to take a walk every once in a while or get something to eat. I think the first several days of the transition, when most of our clients were making the shift, I don't even, 12 hours would go by and I realized I hadn't even, eaten anything. So,
Yeah.
and then, I think remembering to shave and clean up. So just those little things. I appreciate the webinar today. You should have seen what I looked like a couple hours ago. So,
Yeah, I posted
but
a message earlier about that on Facebook, and I was like, "So if you normally dress up for work, are you still doing that for Zoom? And if not, because I've been in a couple of like large group Zoom meetings where there's like 20 people in there, and you see a few people, and you're thinking, I don't think that they would have worn that to the office, but it's
right.
it's kind of like
That's right.
accepted. But I'm wondering what's going to happen to culture and society when we go back to regular life. People keep saying this is the new normal. I hate that term. This is not the new normal. This is a blip in the road. We're going to get through it,
That's
but
right.
hopefully we learn some stuff along the way. I think that's what we're trying to do today is make sure people are prepared. We got to kind of fill the gap from an emergency standpoint right now, but then be prepared the next time they need to be remote, or maybe they find a way to build remote work into their culture in a way that makes sense. Um,
That's right.
so
Yeah.
what
No,
other
I
issues
think
do
there's some
you feel like people are getting
opportunities
stuck
there as
with?
well. Yeah. Sorry.
What,
Yeah.
no problem. What other issues do you feel like people are getting stuck with as they make this transition to remote work?
I mean, from a psychology perspective, I think that just when you wake up at a certain time and you're going into the office and you have your rhythm, losing that rhythm, so I think it's even more important to have schedules now. We're a fan of the Rockefeller habits, and they talk about huddles. We've been doing that for many years, and so we now have an 8 a.m. All staff huddle. We're a smaller company, but larger organizations obviously they can break that up so that way everyone's getting on. We're doing an around the kind of room check-in with everybody, making sure they're healthy and they're okay. So we're doing that every day, 8 o'clock, and kind of sharing some updates or messages. So them having that scheduled call every single day, and then obviously the teams have their own rhythm around managing their work. So I think just sticking to that stuff and not disbanding it if you were already doing it is even more critical right now. I think there's a book, I can't remember the name, but it was about the Ritz Carlton. It might be called Ritz Carlton,
It's
but they talked
it's
about.
Excellence Wins, I think, by Horst Schultz. Is that the one you're talking about?
Okay, yeah, if it was
Might
about
be.
the Ritz Carlton, then that's the one. But basically, it was interesting because this came to mind when I was thinking about this, that they talked about during Katrina that they actually had more huddles than before to actually keep their team in sync. They were, from memory, I think they said they were like even syncing up hourly at some point.
Wow.
So during times of crisis, I think it's even schedules become that much more important. So that's why I mentioned that.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned earlier like something like remembering to eat, but I think in the middle of crisis, especially those of us who are buried in technology, it is easy to get in front of the screen and just get stuck there and not take
Yeah,
that minute. And I have found that sometimes that few minutes of getting up, going for a walk, getting something to eat, getting something to drink can actually make you much more productive when you come back to the computer. It's easy to lie to yourself and think you have to just sit there, buried in that screen all day. And it can be even more likely that somebody does that when they're remote.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, especially if they're not used to working remotely and this is all new to them. You got to get up.
Other two things I had on the issues list for potentially the physical space somebody works in or the technology. What issues do you see or have seen so far where people are struggling in those areas?
So technology, I mean, that's obviously our world, but it's there's challenges at home. There's challenges with obviously the work environment, work infrastructure and networks. Home Wi-Fi coverage, which may have been acceptable before. Now, if you're trying to carve out, a space to work from, you may not get adequate coverage wherever you're going, or even depending on the technology that you're given to work with. Give an example like physical phones. Some people, wanted to take their physical phones home if they were voice over IP, and they potentially can connect to the home network. But, where is that modem in relation to, where they're going to be working from? Can they actually physically cable? So these are things that, sometimes people don't think about until they bring their devices home, and then they're like, oh shoot, where do I plug this in? Or I don't have adequate, coverage to support that. But another part of it is, bandwidth, and this is, internet speeds. Not just home is one variable, in regards to especially the kids now shifting to working school virtual. So they're on during the day and have their own bandwidth consumption. If they're not doing that, they're gaming still or whatever, and you're competing for that, trying to get your work done as well. So there's something there that needs to be looked at if you're having performance issues, and sometimes you can get an upgrade pretty quick from Comcast, whoever, AT&T, whoever your provider is, if that's what's determined as the issue. But bandwidth in the office is another consideration, because now you have all these people VPNing in from the outside. And what we've seen is that some clients had what's called asynchronous speed connections. And what that means is that your download is faster than your upload. And when you're as opposed to synchronous, which is the same. And when you're in the office, download is what's important. But on VPNs, when you're outside the office, you're actually pulling those files from across the VPN connection, and that's where upload is critical. So that the clients that had asynchronous connections are actually, it's more of a, we had to get creative on ways to work around that. If upgrading them to a synchronous connection wasn't an option in real-time fashion. So just some bandwidth, Wi-Fi coverage. There's a laundry list here because this is the world we've been living in, but just a few more points just to kind of stir some thoughts for some folks out there is, the firewalls that in the office that potentially they're connecting to for the VPN. Some of these have limits on how many concurrent, sessions can be running at a time. And, they've never bumped up against those limits before. And now all of a sudden they find out that, it can only support 50, but they got 75 people. So that's something to look at. And, in that regard. So we bumped up against that in 2 client environments. And fortunately, with the Southwest model, as I mentioned, we have stuff in stock. So we were able to quickly, upgrade those 2 environments. But, and then just another thing, just from an employer perspective, is just monitoring the employees and their productivity remotely. They're not in the office focused, and so we have clients coming to us now that we've kind of gotten through the initial push and saying, how do we keep an eye on this? How do we make sure that they're doing the work that they're supposed to be doing? And so that's a culture thing, obviously, but what technologies can we deploy to kind of make sure we have some oversight over that and managing it properly? So just a few points there.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate a couple of those and have you kind of circle back for explanation. Let's start with the first one, which is, this seems basic, but I think this is the real danger when it comes to 2, no offense, but 2 relative technology nerds between you and I. We probably love this stuff more than maybe the average person does. And something as simple as physically plugging into a router with a cable versus using the Wi-Fi. Talk about the advantages of that and why somebody might want to consider it if they can, depending on if their router is not stuck in an attic, or mine's in my laundry room at my house. I have to literally sit in my laundry room.
Right.
So
yeah, that's why you need to consider where it's located, because sometimes it's wherever your cable connection comes in or wherever your phone lines come in, typically. But the best performance that you're going to get is physically cabled. I mean, even in the office, typically wireless is going to be much slower performance, as well as, again, signal strength. Where are you in relation to where that wireless access point is or points are? And then, but some devices, like I mentioned, a phone, voice over IP phone, if you have them in the office, there was some clients that said, hey, can we take these home and plug them in? And technically, yes, it works fine, but then you got to think about where that router or modem is in relation to where that phone's going to be, because that does have to be connected. There are wireless phones, they do make those, but that's more, it's not something you typically see. But
yeah, that's a great example of technology, though, that can have a real high impact on people. If somebody has an old traditional phone line versus somebody that has a more modern, voice over IP type setup, at least that does become an option, which is pretty awesome, really, that you can just take your phone, plug it into a different internet, and you still have the same phone that you had somewhere else. I mean, that can have a big impact on an office as well.
Yeah, the next level up from there, which is what's called a soft phone, and this is where a lot of our clients that had this capability went, because they don't need the physical phone. It's a piece of software you install on your PC, and then with the catch is you need a headset if you don't want to talk through the actual, open mic and speaker on the computer. But and those got bought up quickly on Amazon. It was amazing. Webcams and headsets became things that you just couldn't really get much in the first few days. But soft phones, yeah, if you have that technology in a cloud-based phone system, that's where, the legacy phone systems in the office, those are getting called out right now as just something that's, if they want to adapt to an environment like this, they need to do something about if they're dependent on phones for their business, and not every business is.
Yeah, that's true. The other two things that you mentioned after that, which again, this seems like basic stuff, but it can have a big impact. And sometimes you just don't think about it, especially in the midst of the crisis. I did one of these calls yesterday with somebody, and they don't have the best internet at their house, and they're upgraded as high as they can go. And they have a couple of kids who are now home. And if a kid jumps on Xbox and somebody else is streaming YouTube, and you're trying to do a live stream, and I mean, all of a sudden that bandwidth can get sucked up real fast. And before the podcast, they literally called their kids downstairs and said, "Hey, can you put your phones in airplane mode and turn off the Xbox so that we can have a clear signal?" I mean, sometimes it might come down to that for people, is knowing who's doing what on their internet at that moment. If they have something like this going on, we want it to work as smoothly as possible, so we have good recording for people.
That's right. Yeah.
And then the other thing that you said, which I think I hadn't really thought about this either, but people could literally just call their internet providers and ask if there's an upgrade. In some of those cases, they can just flip a switch and they can make their internet faster. It's going to depend on what kind of connection they have, I suppose. But that's a great little tip for somebody. You got internet problems at home, or you got a lot of kids trying to do remote work while you're working. Call Comcast, call AT&T, call whoever your provider is, and just ask them, "Hey, is there an upgrade available?" And who knows, they might even be willing to give you some kind of a good deal based on the current environment of things. And
yeah, some packages are actually less expensive than the ones that you might be on. So that was in my case. I upgraded, and my cost went down. So it could be a win-win.
Can't beat that. And then some of the other things, like monitoring productivity, that is a little bit of a cultural thing, and it's going to vary from company to company. But it's a good time to check in on those things and figure out what tools you have in place to know that work is ultimately getting done. And frankly, we're all pretty blessed to live in this environment technologically that we live in now versus 20 years ago, because we have a lot better technology now than we did 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah. If an event like this occurred then, I mean, it would be just a complete, stoppage of all work. Right. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the fortunate side. So let's talk about one of the big things that once we get those functional things in place, this idea of cybersecurity or just security in general, of really what are the risks, what's at stake if somebody does not have the right security in place, and what are some things maybe in the short term that they need to look at. They obviously need to bring in a professional. I mean, a company of any good size needs to have an IT company like TruTechnology to come in and help them sort that out. But in the short term, what are the things that maybe they need to be worried about, and then what they need to pay attention to?
Got it. Okay. You mentioned earlier about physical space. This actually plays into it because, having that computer that you're using for work, whether it's a work laptop or, I mean, this thing is not going with you to the office during the day anymore. It's sitting in the same place. So, and if you had brought a work desktop home and are connecting using that, just making sure that that is, not accessible to the kids, to the other family members that may want to get on there and surf the web or do whatever, because that potentially can cause, can open up the opportunity for infections and things like that. So the physical aspect, what you mentioned earlier, that plays into that. This is interesting because the computers at home, like your home PC, has not been managed by an IT department. So who knows if there's even antivirus on or endpoint security or anything like that, or it's not, potentially being patched, to the current levels. So there could even be an infection that exists on that machine. And then it's interesting when you think about this, you bring home the work computer, it's now connected to the same network, either on the same Wi-Fi or plugged into the same LAN. Now, that infected home PC is exposing the work machine, to potential infection as well, because that's how some of these, they call them worms, they spread, across networks. So that's where there's a lot of risk that exists around this, because the home machine infects work machine is connected to the corporate network through a VPN. And then it impacts the servers and other things, and then everyone in the company is affected. So that would be devastating to a company right now when they're just trying to navigate this crisis, let alone have some sort of ransomware event or something like that happen that started from a home computer.
Yeah, we don't need a digital virus to go with our coronavirus.
That's right. Yeah. I know the word virus in our world was bad to begin with, and now we have this extra word. So we're often when someone says the word virus, it always brought us to attention before, but now it brings us to an extreme level of attention. But so definitely increased chance of ransomware there. I mentioned devices kind of left unlocked that children could access, and there's a big thing right now. I mean, the hackers are exploiting, the disruption that's happening right now, and they're sending phishing emails out with things that they think are relevant that people would click on. Even IT departments, I think, have to be more vigilant, because for us to get a phone call right now saying, "Hey, I work for so-and-so company, I need to get set up remotely," we have to do extra diligence to validate that person actually works at the organization, and we know who they are. The calls aren't coming from their corporate office anymore, where we know the caller ID. It's coming from just some random cell phone number or a home phone number, and that even includes password resets as well. So being extra diligent right now and making sure that emails that you get, the sender, you were expecting it, don't open up any attachments, and it's always best just to pick up the phone and call the person and ask them if they send you something, because that's a good check right there. And if you weren't expecting it, then you probably shouldn't open it. So just some tips there. There's, in the compliance side of the world, for our clients that are in healthcare or do credit card processing, you talk about HIPAA and PCI and things like that. This is a whole nother, ball of wax, because potentially they're from HIPAA, if they can't bring devices home that are unencrypted. So, because the risk of, violation and even opening themselves up to a breach in that regard. So there's things that have to be considered around even intellectual property, for organizations, if they have things that are considered secure, and now they're letting these devices leave their network and be in home networks and that are unsupervised. So some things there. I mean, compliance. There's an idea that if we just leave the computer in the office and then we remote into that we're probably safer. But depending on what you're connecting from, just to throw this out there, if there is something running, some malware on that computer, some virus, there's something called a keylogger, which they can actually track your keystrokes. So this is where, if you're typing in your username and password to get into your VPN or get into your remote computer, those credentials could be captured and then leveraged elsewhere. So there's a whole lot, around this. I've only touched on a fraction of it, but just some things to be wary of. And there's things to mitigate all of these situations. But obviously, again, number one was functionality. Let's get everybody back to work. But now we got to circle back through these things and make sure that we're protecting the business.
Yeah, and we obviously don't have the time to dig into all these in detail, but I think these things are really important for businesses, and people need to set aside the time to make sure that they are aware of what's going on and then are able to either implement the proper changes internally or communicate to their team. I mean, something as simple as like those phishing emails that you were talking about. It's crazy what happens and how easy those things happen. I know, like Stacy, my office admin, gets emails all the time, and it'll look like they're from me, sort of. And it'll say like J. Owen is the from, but that's not the real email address. And then it'll say, "Hey, can you help me real quick with something?" Which of course she's going to reply, "Sure, what do you need?" And then they reply, "I need to grab 10 gift cards for $100 each to so-and-so and mail them to this address. Can you take that care of me? Can you take care of that in the next 30 minutes? And one of the first times she got one of these, I had not really communicated this to the team, but they used a word, fortunately, in the email that I would never have used. But otherwise, she had not been appropriately educated to know, because, I mean, that's her job, is to help handle payments and checks and all this. And this happens at high levels, too. I saw a story in the news. I don't know if you saw this. It was a couple weeks ago, and it was one of the Shark Tank people, Barbara. I can't remember her last name, but she's the big real estate mogul. She had a phishing email that ended up costing her like $350,000. Somebody
Yeah, I did
thought there
see
was a
that.
deposit on a transaction. They do that kind of thing all the time. And, I guess when you're a mega multimillionaire, maybe 300 grand is not that much, but I think 300 grand is probably a lot for anybody, especially when it goes out to essentially a hacker at that point. So that just kind of multiplies how important these things are from a risk standpoint, and how having somebody like you and your team alongside can make all the difference. Because I run a marketing company, not a technology company. I need somebody else to come alongside me and tell me, hey, here's all the things you need to be aware of. Um, and I think that, those things that you kind of went through, ransomware, devices that are unlocked, hackers and phishing emails, HIPAA and other compliance issues, connection dependencies based on where they're at. And those are things people really need to be paying attention to. What can companies do maybe in the short term to help either educate themselves or kind of improve, so that they're at least taking the first step towards protecting it, even if they don't have a company to handle it all for them at this moment?
Sure. On the phishing side, just I don't want to scare you more, but I'll just there's a scenario that's even worse than just can you get me some gift cards? It's when the phishing email. A lot of them are designed to collect credentials, and this is what we're seeing more of with the COVID-19 stuff. They're basically saying, hey, look at this company policy. I want you to evaluate or whatever, and they're just trying to get them to click on it. It takes them to a page that looks like most people are in Office 365 or Google, G Suite at this point. So it looks like a page that they would just have to log in again, and they're collecting credentials. And without something called multi-factor authentication, or MFA, or 2FA, sometimes it's called, where you have an additional, it's not just what you know, but it's what you have. So like your phone gets a message with a, one-time password. That password, username password that you gave them is good, for them to use potentially for months, depending on what your password policy is. So the bigger issue around the stuff is that they collect that, and then they log into the account and you don't even know they're in there. That's the bigger risk, because now they're looking at your email flow. They're looking at your vernacular, your conversation that you're having with others. And then when they jump into action, which I read a statistic the other day that said typically they're embedded in your environment for 97 days. That was the number.
Wow.
Before they actually make themselves known on average. So they could be in there for months. And then finally, when they act, they're sending an email that's from you because they're in the account. And they make it extremely relevant, and they may even, hey, Susie, how's your son doing? I heard he was sick, because they've seen the email interactions. So that person immediately has relevance. They think that it's you, and then they take the action, and typically it's a wire transfer, which is, I don't know what happened in the Shark Tank scenario, but that's the scariness of, and that's where technology can help even completely eradicate and avoid those examples. But I wanted to touch on that because I think people need to be aware that that's the bigger risk than the gift card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, I think a lot of people may be in a place where they don't even understand why they would need to have this two-factor authentication type of thing, where either it goes to an app on your phone, or it goes to your, like a text message, which is the most common one. And that really is why, because I remember actually years and years ago, I had a friend whose father was in the military, and they used to have these, they had like a keychain sort of device, and it would just have a number that would cycle. So it was kind of like that. You had to have that physical device with you in order to log into that account. And I guess we're kind of replacing something similar with the text messages. That kind of just same
No,
idea.
they still have those, because if you think about employees that don't have company provided phones, where you're not going to install an app, or so the key fobs are actually very inexpensive now, and you can just throw it on their keychain, and that's what they use. And every 50 seconds or whatever, the code changes on it. Pretty neat. Yeah, it's very, very old school, but it still does the trick.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool when I saw it. That was many years ago. I think I was in high school at that point. So that technology has been around for a while. I think it's just now becoming more popular in consumer devices because we're storing so much online. And I think now that people are transitioning where they're doing work things at home that may be of a more secure nature, we need to be even more aware of these particular things. Anything else that you feel like, companies need to be doing right now in order to help protect themselves in the short term?
So I think, I was thinking when you asked that shortly ago, and it's at a most basic level. Sometimes I can go, more complex than necessary. But most basic level, not allowing non-company owned computers that don't have the same protections that you have in the office to connect to that VPN. that you'd have the, so that's like the extreme of getting people functional, is just giving them the VPN on their home computers. But that's opening up a whole bunch of security risks. So we've, taken a hard line around that and had to work with customers on, you can use that, but it has to be restricted in a way to just maybe access your work desktop, and that's it. So, you can use that to connect and then remote in a secure way. So non-company owned devices. And then, with work computers, I mean, I don't want to get technical around this, but there's even different types of VPN connections. This is something to ask your IT provider. There's something called full tunnel or split tunnel. And basically just in layman's terms, a full tunnel VPN means that when you connect all of your traffic, 100% of it is sent across that VPN, which effectively puts you back behind your corporate firewall again. And that firewall in the office is doing a tremendous amount to protect the environment every day. So to be back behind it when you're on the VPN is great. Split tunnel, which some vendors, depending on which vendor you're looking at, that's their default. Some default to full. That means that only the server traffic goes across the VPN, while all other traffic, and maybe you check in your email, it could be, watching, Fox News on a separate browser, that's going across, your home internet connection. So it's like that computer at that point is almost connected to both networks. That's that split aspect of it. So these are things to ask about. How are we set up? How do we mitigate the risk if we're split in that type of situation? So also when these computers, these work computers are leaving the office, whether it be a laptop or a desktop, making sure that they're still getting patched. Vulnerabilities, are announced every single day, multiple times a day. So they still have to be left on after hours, and the systems that patch have to be, if they don't already support distributed environments, that's something that needs to be looked at if it's internal IT or otherwise. How do we still patch those computers now that they're not in the office anymore, and maintain whatever security software is on them? Same exact thing. If they had endpoint security or antivirus, which that's one aspect of it. If that was being maintained through a server in the office and now they're not in the office anymore, how is that thing still getting updated and keeping them protected? So there's a lot. Security awareness training. It kind of goes back to the huddles of like, now's the time not to stop that stuff. If anything, it's time to even increase the frequency around it. Yeah. So some companies we work with, we do what's called phishing testing. So we'll actually send out emails that look legitimate to see who clicks on them, who actually fills out the form and gave away the keys to the network, and gave their username and password away. So if anything, do that more now than before. I think they're getting hit, so that's something that you don't want to stop because they're out of the office. So, I mentioned the auto locking of the desktops earlier, making sure that those are auto locked, drive encryption, the multi-factor authentication. There's a ton here. So again, you got to prioritize all this stuff, figure out where you're most exposed, and just put a prioritized plan of action in place to mitigate, the most critical risk, first, and then go from there.
Yeah, I have about 1,000 questions that I don't have time to answer as it relates to all that, especially around VPNs and all kind of other stuff. But I'm not going to go there right now because we're going to run out. We're going to be talking all day if that's the case. There's lots of time. But I think what it does do is it drums up a reality, which is really important. Of number one, what questions maybe I need to be asking, and number two, while ignorance might be bliss, it also can be dangerous. And I think especially in this environment where we're headed, it could create danger for people. And they need to be aware of that. And, they have the right people to help them handle those things. Next kind of thing I have on my list here, and this is more forward thinking than current scenario, is, how do you see this affecting how companies use technology once we're out of this current crisis? Which, for everybody listening, we will get out of this thing. We will move forward. We're going to grow. We're going to get better. We're going to learn. So Doug, what do you think people will learn from this technologically wise, and what do you think will carry forward, hopefully in a positive way?
So I completely agree. This is a blip in time, right now that we'll get through. I think that we still have potentially months ahead, because especially with I heard some states have canceled the school year period. So kids are not going back to the physical school. They're going to stay virtual. Yep. And with that, so that parents are going to have to stay home whether or not the offices are reopened or not. So the remote work reality is going to exist for months to come. regardless. So, I think focusing on, how to make it that your team is highly effective during, this time, and has what they need physically in the house. If they had dual monitors or 3 monitors or whatever in the office before, let's get them set back up with that again. This may be months. So let's make sure that they're as productive as can be, and working in the most secure way. So looking forward, I think that, companies that were well situated right now to adapt to this have a competitive advantage, where they can, still serve their customers and in a productive and efficient way, and we're able to get out in front of it. So I think there's some, with disruption, there's opportunity. So there's some opportunity there to seize that. And I think it's really forcing companies to evaluate what work in their business can be done remotely. There's some businesses that you can't install fence posts through a computer at somebody's house. It depends on what they do and how they are affected by this. So I think just thinking about that and looking at how to diversify in some cases, or how to mitigate that risk, I think is going to be an important strategic agenda item for the organizations. And there's also opportunity here to, obviously there's been a lot of organizations that have been impacted financially by this. So looking at how they can use technology, maybe even staying in a partial, telework capacity to keep overhead down. So that's something that may continue on just for that purpose in that regard. So just looking forward, looking at security practices, there's some shifts around even computing around, not necessarily being so reliant on the desktop or the laptop, and even shifting to the cloud in that regard. A lot of people, the shift to the cloud as far as applications go has been happening for years. You look at like Salesforce.com and QuickBooks Online, and a lot of people are using things like that, which made this transition easier for some parts of their business. But looking at this and saying, like, how do we become 100% cloud-based in what we do, and even how we access our desktops, and what if our desktop's in the cloud, and that mitigates a lot of these security concerns? How do we set that up in a secure way? So I think there's a lot of questions to be asked right now, and how to be best prepared for the next few months. But then also, should an event like this happen again, being in Florida, hurricanes are not going away. I mean, there's going to be events, hopefully nothing ever like this again, but that we have to be flexible for. So how do we best situate ourselves? So I think those questions are going to get asked, and I think it's a great exercise to go through to get some answers to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Doug, you've been really helpful helping me think through some of this technology stuff. Really, I felt like I was pretty knowledgeable, and I realized when I'm talking to you that I'm really not that knowledgeable about a lot of this stuff. And it's really helpful to kind of think through, and I think a lot of other business leaders need to do that. But before we wrap up this podcast, 2 things I want to do. One is I want to back up a little bit and talk about the idea of building a business that lasts. That is the topic of this podcast, after all. I think some of these things we're talking about future growth affect that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts first on what you think is something that you want to leave with other business owners as they think about building a business that lasts, because you have done that. And number 2, I'd love to hear, I know you've got an upcoming webinar that you're doing. Depending on when people listen to this podcast, they may be watching an on-demand version or something, but a live version is coming up, I know, April 1st. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. So number 1, when you're talking to another business owner, another leader, another entrepreneur maybe, and they want to know, Doug, how do I build a business that lasts? That's a very big question with a very long answer. But if you had to distill that down a little bit, what's something that you would want to leave them with to think about and take away today?
So great question. Yeah, that's that could be a long one to answer, but just a couple of points. I would say, company culture, having a positive team that's ready to rise to any challenge, and there's a lot that goes into that. Having your core values defined, and having hiring in alignment with those, and just kind of building this army is critical. So culture, I would say, is paramount. Maintaining culture through this crisis is not something. It's something that needs to be focused on as well. It can't be left to the curb. It takes years to build it, and it could take days to destroy it. So we're actually doing. We're trying this for the first time, but we're doing a virtual happy hour today at 5 o'clock. So we're doing a Teams meeting. Everyone's getting on video that can make it, and we're doing a cheers together. It's been a challenging last couple of weeks. So let off a little steam and celebrate the success. So got to maintain it. It's not something that just maintains itself. So little things like that go a long way. So culture. The other part is just establishing a strong leadership team and getting out of their way. So that would be, I think, a key part. We've been in business 18 years now, and my leadership team, we meet weekly. This was obviously, we've had separate meetings just about our COVID response, but empowering them to make good decisions, and just getting out of their way and letting them do their thing. So culture and leadership teams, I think, would be two key things of many that helps build a business that lasts, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. And I love hearing it too, especially for somebody like you who's very technically focused, into technology, into all those details. It's easy to forget the people element. And I don't mean for you personally, I just mean like in general, it's easy for people to forget the people element. And the reality is we all have people that work with us, people that work for us, and people that we're working for. And even something like a virtual happy hour, it's amazing how something like that can just change their reality and the cadence a little bit and go, hey, we're still on the same team. We still got the same culture. So I love that you brought that up. I know coming up, you've got a webinar where you're going to dig into this stuff a little bit more, and you're going to teach it and help people kind of have some more resources to take away. I'd love to hear you kind of just tell us a little bit about what you're going to cover there and why it might be helpful for them.
Okay, great. Yeah, so on April 1st at 2 p.m., we're going to start a COVID webinar series. The first one is going to be specifically about remote work, which we've touched on quite a bit, but talking more about making the team as productive and efficient as possible. I think everyone's kind of mid-transition right now, so things to think about. And then also, I mentioned that Office 365 free 6 months. There's other free resources that have been made available in the technology community. In some cases, even like 3 years of licenses for free. So we're going to share some of those resources to be able to leverage, and so just trying to help people through this and add value as much as we can. So the first one will be on that. The second one, which is the next one we have planned out, is we're looking at a week later around specifically cybersecurity. So there'll be more information pushed out about that as well. But looking at just trying to educate people and keep their businesses protected through this crisis we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about that. I think that the idea of that continuing education right now is really, really important. I know I've done more of that in all kinds of different areas lately, from finance to process to systems. And now I think technology is probably one of the most important things. Looks like people can go register for that at TruTechRemote.com. So if that's something that you guys are watching on Facebook, or you hear about this later on the podcast, TruTechRemote.com will take you to a page where you can register, so you get a reminder about that webinar. Doug, I'm excited that you're doing that and really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today and help everybody out with your knowledge and experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jay. Appreciate it.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there, where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.